for joining. I'm so thrilled that you're here. This is the first crash course session of the Gap Year Fair season. Really excited to be with us to kick off that big event. A really fair. If you haven't already, there is still so much time and so many opportunities to join one. We have, I believe, 9 other fairs coming up. The most recent one or the most upcoming going to be tomorrow. So definitely do join us if you haven't already. Super easy to register for that fair. All you have to do is visit our Gap Year Hub, which I will drop a link to in the chat once Jane and Jason get started. Another really cool resource that I want to bring to your attention is our Gap Matcher quiz. So if you're joining us and you don't really quite know where you want to take your gap year, or what you want to do with your gap time, this is a really awesome resource to use to narrow down sort of a customized list of programs to get started with and reach out to. And then just a quick reminder, one of the best things, in my opinion, about this crash course series is that you registered once on Eventbrite on Zoom, and now you have access to these really amazing crash course sessions where you'll get to chat and have really, personalized one-on-one conversations with amazing expert gap year counselors like Jane and Jason of J2 Guides. So I definitely invite you to tune in to our future crash courses to come, which cover a really exciting array of topics that you can check out here. And then finally, this is my kind of final announcement before we really dive into what everybody has been waiting for. So here at USA Gap Year Fairs, we're always looking to improve the user experience and really, optimize Gap Year Fair information for our attendees like you and for our audience. So we are committed to doing that. And for that reason, we're offering $250 to a fair attendee who fills out our post-event survey today. That attendee, that winner will be randomly chosen after the series is completed. But please do fill out that survey. We really want to hear from you. It's just a quick one, and I'll be sending it out along with those other links that I was chatting about earlier. Okay, so without further ado, I'm just about to pass the mic over to our amazing hosts for the evening, Jane and Jason of J2 Guides. I could not wax poetic enough about these two. They have so much experience, over 2 decades of mentoring students. They're both accredited gap year counselors, of course, and they've also been speaking as keynote presenters with USA Gap Year Fairs since 2011, I believe. So needless to say, we are so lucky to have them today. And I will go ahead and pass the mic along to Jane and Jason. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Isn't that the best energy? What a great way to kick off an evening.
I know. I feel if we were like jousting knights, you should be our herald to introduce us. You're incredible. As Claire mentioned, we're Jane and Jason's Soroyan wife-husband team and experiential educators for the last 25 plus years. We are so passionate about gap year, partially because both of us took gap time at really meaningful points in our lives. Of course, we did not know each other back then, but our gap years helped us focus back into what we wanted to study when we were in college, helped us find our way in our initial career trajectories, and has led us to living a really fulfilled life, which is maybe the most important thing of all, is that gap year groundwork helped launch us into lives that felt authentic and in line with our own integrity and really meaningful.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great bio. We could go on. And I just want to point out that center picture because I just love, that is a group that Jason and I led for a semester in Tanzania, and it was Halloween. And what do you do when it's Halloween and you're in East Africa on safari in Ngorongoro Crater? You make your students dress up in costume and feel ridiculous and have one of the most memorable Halloweens you'll have for your entire life, which I think is kind of one of those things about a gap year, is the mundane can become so profound, that the simplest things become so joyous, that the friendships become lifelong. And so it's honestly we've led many programs. It's one of our most beloved groups. It was a very special semester, but this Halloween picture brings back so many great memories. But let's talk about you and this idea, this question of, is a gap year right for you? And the thing I'd add to that, and Claire, you can bump us to the next slide whenever you're ready, is this idea of, is it right for you now? And Jason and I were talking a lot about this over the course of today, thinking about what kinds of questions will be coming to us this evening. because there's a lot to say about this concept of a gap year. So we do want to start macro level, and then understanding and relating to it, to that point of, is it right for you and right for you right now? But let's just take a step back and make sure we're all working with some of the same kind of operative terms of what is a gap year. And the reason why this is so important is because many of you will have had some bit of exposure. You've heard another speaker, maybe you've read an article, maybe your neighbor's kid took a gap year, or a cousin, and it looked like something that is not what you want. And it can be, as a result, very easy to dismiss it and say, well, they went to East Africa. That is not me. So thus a gap year must not be for me. Or they went and did an internship in Berlin and spoke German, and none of that sounds interesting to me. So I guess a gap year is not for me. So Jason and I really value breaking it down into a definition that really is applicable to every single student we've worked with for over 2.5 decades. And really what that is are these key phrases we've put up here in front of you. So most importantly, a gap year is an intentional break. We use the word intentional probably 10 or 20 times a day. This is something you've really thought about and considered, and that's why you're here tonight. And we're going to keep going down that path. Generally speaking, gap years often have a pretty significant hands-on component. So there are academics in some gap years, but largely it's learning by doing. It's experiential learning. It could be an exploration of skills and interests. It certainly could be an exposure to career paths. It could absolutely be in the United States, certainly could be overseas. And it's absolutely for all ages, for all learners, and at any time. So as you can see in this definition, nowhere do we talk about where you have to go, what you have to do, what it's going to cost. So your gap year is going to fit your unique goals, interests, needs, desires, and only you can define those. And we'll touch on a lot of that this evening. But that's how we want to begin, with just this offering of a definition that hopefully every single person who's watching this, parents included, can really relate to.
We also want to just provide you with the idea that you are at the spot that you're at now. And particularly for the young adults, that's who we're talking to. You're where you are now. Maybe you're about to graduate high school. Maybe you're already in college. Maybe you're on a different trajectory. But where you are now, you likely want to head somewhere else. Maybe that is heading on to college. Maybe that's heading into a career or skills-based program. Maybe it's right into the work world. There are many different ways you can get to that destination. Gap year provides you a path to that destination that's going to build more skill sets. It's also going to offer you real life hands-on experience that you will then be able to apply there. So we want you to think about this as a path that is leading already to that destination that you know you want to go to. It may not just be the one that's the straightforward path that everyone's been telling you to take, but there's a lot of value in taking the slightly more meandering journey.
Absolutely. Let's keep moving on, Claire. Thank you. Want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah,
great.
So one of the questions that we ask all of our students when we're beginning this process is, why do you want to take gap year, or why do you want to take gap time? And why do people choose to do this? And this is really the starting point to answering that question for yourself of whether or not a gap year is right for you and whether it's right now. So listed up here, you can see these thought bubbles from this amazing young individual who's thinking a lot about some of the things that might motivate her to take gap time. And you might resonate with some of these. These are some of the most commonly cited reasons that young adults say that they take gap time. So they want to build their maturity or confidence. They've worked really hard in high school and they feel burnt out and they're not quite ready to go on academically because they want to rejuvenate themselves before they actually put their focused intention on that college level course or on that skills-based course. Lots of people, like Jane said, take this time so that they can have exposure to a new career. Wouldn't it be amazing if you knew what your major actually was going to be through hands-on experience before going into college? Wouldn't it be incredible if you had more of an idea of what your profession was going to be before you actually started studying for it and had to weed your way through all those classes to kind of figure it out? So these are some of the amazing reasons, and we want you to figure out what your why or your multiple whys are for thinking about this time. Now, we talk a lot about college and what's your why too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would recommend you take yourself down this questioning of why college and why gap year. And I believe it's the next slide. I hope we put it in the right order. that kind of helps us look at these different things. And we would want you, whether you are a freshman, a sophomore, junior, wherever you are in your journey, the thing is we are choosing college more often than not because it's what one does. And high school is about preparation for college, is preparation for who knows what's next. And the value of you being here, which I respect so deeply, is you're willing to just take a pause and like really evaluate what is the best path for us, my child, me right now. And so it might be important and valuable for you to look at gap year and college side by side. So we just wanted to highlight a handful of things that we think about that are same but different. So great, we've got peers in both. Really important. A lot of times people who are thinking about gap year is like, oh, but I don't want to be alone. I want to be with peers. Guess what? Great news. Loads of people taking gap years, loads of opportunities to be gapping with other like-minded peers. In fact, one of the most commonly shared sentiments from my students when I'm debriefing them after a semester or a year is, I think I've made like lifelong friends. So there's something very deep and profound. Most of us have had the gift of that experience, a summer camp, study abroad, a gap year, backpacking around Europe for parents, or some great adventure you took after high school or college or grad school. And oftentimes when we actually step into experiences that we've chosen, as opposed to what's just been put in front of us, we actually start to meet our people. It's true. So peers are there at both levels. That's great. Look at the subtlety of the difference between professors versus mentors. So again, your gap year can absolutely and should absolutely have instructors, program leaders. We can call them lots of things, but they will absolutely be more of a mentor and stepping into that mentorship role, as opposed to a professor who is there to school you in a particular topic or subject. So that's a really significant difference. Does one resonate more with you than the other as you go down this, is a gap year right for me? Mentors, that sounds kind of interesting. What does that mean? Again, learning, big part of both of these journeys, right? But one is classroom learning and one is experiential. Just look at the pictures. They tell the story right there, sitting in the classroom and then looking at learning outside of the four walls of a classroom and thinking about what it means to take knowledge outside of a textbook and put it into a real world or applicable setting. That's pretty exciting. So gap years are absolutely stimulating, provocative, intellectually stimulating, but often in a much more hands-on way.
And we feel we want to share that we're huge fans of academic learning. We think that there's so much time that should be spent in order to gain that knowledge that you can learn in a classroom. And isn't it incredible when you can take what you've already learned, apply it in a real world setting, and then ultimately take the experience from that and then go back to the academic classroom. So if you were to imagine yourself as a high school graduate with all that you've learned up to this point, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to apply some of that right now in a real world setting? And then think about what it looks like to go back to college and being in that philosophy class or that anthropology class or that math class or being in a communications class and actually having something very valuable to contribute because you've experienced it firsthand. And that is a perspective that you're going to be able to share with your peers and ultimately is going to help you deepen your studies once you do get to school or that next educational step.
Absolutely. And again, wonderfully, skills are absolutely a part of both environments. We tend to look at the college experience as more focused on strictly academic skills, whereas the gap year, certainly there'll be topical skills if you're deciding to study marine conservation or Spanish, but often we find life skills, a combination of both soft core human skills as well as hard skills. So there's, I think, a much more attention put towards students emerging as more well-rounded is the word that comes to mind. Self-possessed, confident, resilient young adults. I'm not sure those skills are as actively taught in college. I think you kind of might learn trial by fire. You didn't study, you didn't show up for the tests, there's fallout. Here, you're held accountable. You didn't show up on time, you weren't prepared, you weren't dressed appropriately culturally, you didn't have the right gear you needed for the backpacking trip. There's a consequence that will be managed and reflected back at you, and with opportunity to move through that within this wonderful group context and with those mentors that are there. So that's a really big difference as well. And lastly, Jason and I talk a lot about this, but sometimes families will say, well, why not just do a study abroad semester? Forget the gap year. What if they just go study abroad? I mean, absolutely, that is something, but that is also still really different because it is grade and performance based, whereas gap years are kind of more process based, right? This is the process of inquiry. It's the process of making a mistake. It's the process of figuring out how to be self-sufficient without my parents. But you're doing it hopefully, and students are incentivized and motivated to do it because they're so invested in the content and invested in their peers and invested in their mentors, and not just being motivated by a grade. So I think just to kind of, again, look at this side by side, lots of similarities, and we did that intentionally, but subtle and not so subtle differences in what a year of each could offer to a young adult.
So well said. We spoke with a program today that's focused in marine biology and science, and they have a 4-week internship program. And during this time, students are diving 2 to 3 dives a day, learning how to dive, and then ultimately progressing through the different diving paradigms, advanced open water, rescue diver, dive master, if you want. The focus of the program is actually on species identification, coral identification, doing research hands-on in the water. Imagine what that looks like and that feels like in terms of process. The entire exposure to these animals is what helps you learn about them. And once again, deciding whether or not you're going to take that on to further studies. That is real world experience. That is ultimately going to lead to better performance once you go on to your further career.
So true.
Okay.
We can keep going, Claire. Thank you.
So we want to help you answer this question. Is a gap year right for me? And or is a gap year right for me right now? And as Jane mentioned, there are other times in one's life that you might choose to take gap time. One of the things that we like to share with young adults that is really special about being 18 to 20 is that this is a period of life where you actually don't have necessarily all of the other responsibilities you might have later on. You probably haven't started accruing student debt. You probably don't own a home yet. You probably aren't in a super long-term relationship yet. You probably don't have children yet. All of these kinds of responsibilities, as you may assume some of them later on in your life, both open up doors of incredible freedom and inquiry into those areas, but also may limit some of the ability for you to investigate some of these hands-on experiences later on. This is an amazing opportunity, and it may be right for you for all of those what is your why reasons we were covering, but also because this is one of those most unique times that you can actually take it in your lifetime. So when you're starting to look at this, when you're thinking about this for you, let's start with some of these fundamental questions. What are my personal, academic, or career-related goals? Have you articulated them yet? Have you shared them with your family yet? Has everyone sat down and talked about them? If we don't know what our compass heading is, how do we know what direction we're actually going in? And if you're able to identify some of those, you might find that actually getting some of that hands-on experience now might really help propel you towards those goals. Or perhaps you actually know exactly what you want to do right now, and heading on to college or whatever is the right path for you might be the right next step. But answering that set of questions, actually writing it down, getting very clear about it is really the place to start from. It's the foundation of this entire inquiry.
I think from there, it's then going to the question right below it. Can a gap year, and frankly, we should have written, or college, help me meet those goals? So if one of your personal goals is to address maybe a rough 2 years of COVID and mental health, how can gap year help support that? How can college help support that? So as Jason said, starting with those personal, academic, and career goals, and then again, running that college and gap year list right below it, and just honestly exploring how each can, will, or can't, or won't meet those goals of yours. This is a great process. And it might just be one word to start or one sentence to start. And I know that Jason and I come across with loads of energy, and by no means do we mean to make it seem like this is simple and it's going to come right out of you. We know this is a work in progress. You've already, accomplished so much just by showing up and being curious. So keep with that curiosity and just try to articulate, can this school or could a gap year help me meet these particular goals I have?
And the nice thing is, as we've been saying for this entire presentation, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Choosing to take a gap year doesn't mean you're not choosing to go on to college. Choosing to go on to college doesn't mean you can't take important experiential time. one of the things that a lot of people don't really know or don't know a lot about is that almost every single college and university in this country is happy to grant you a deferral, meaning that if you were slated to go in fall 2022 to the college of your dreams, most likely that school would allow you to come in fall of 2023 in allowing you to take gap time. Colleges are such big fans of students who take this time because you've had a year to be out in the world, another year of maturity and growth, another year to get clear and focused on what you want to do. And you're more likely to actually end up traveling through your major and matriculating that way much faster than some of your peers, and also feeling really happy with your experience at school, all things that colleges love.
Absolutely. Another piece here in thinking about if a gap year is right for you is to explore the budget. And this is such a great opportunity as a family to have a really honest conversation. Do we have resources to put towards a gap year? And parents will often say, boy, we've been stashing money away in a 529 and just hadn't been thinking about another year of college. Your gap year doesn't have to cost a ton of money to be successful and fruitful. And it would be really helpful early on to understand what kind of resources you may have to put towards it, because that may help distinguish maybe gap year is not right for us now. We just don't have any extra cash lying around, and the things that you want to do will cost. So maybe we do a year or two of college, you can work and save money, take a semester off. Again, there's no time about when you can or can't take gap year or gap semester. So with the budget and resources piece, this is just, again, a wonderful opportunity for a family to have a really honest and transparent conversation. What parents or guardians can do to support, how much students can do to support an entire gap year. And these are presentations we given throughout the USA Gap Year Fair season. So you will hit on this in other presentations, but a gap year could certainly include time at home working, your summers, and there are cost neutral experiences, work exchange opportunities, there are scholarships. So there's lots of way to help further support that, but that is an important consideration for everyone. Just while I'm on it, it is worth noting, because I already brought up the 529, a lot of the gap year programs do have relationships with either the Gap Year Association or a college or other four-year institution. And if that's the case, then the program itself has some level of college accreditation, and therefore you actually can use 529 funds to pay for some or all of some of these gap year programs. That's a really eye-opening piece of information for a lot of families. So sometimes the cost of their programs can be a little scary, but they also often have pretty ample scholarships that also are often accessible or available to apply your 529 to. So that's something really worth looking at. Lastly, you want to take the last one home?
So we started this presentation talking about the idea of knowing where you're starting from, and everybody's starting from a slightly different place, and ultimately knowing where you're going. And that period in between is, what do you need to be successful to go to where you're going to? What is it that you need in order to build your own personal maturity and growth, to build a sense of independence, to build particular skill sets, to gain partial orientations towards knowledge? And ultimately, what are the things that are going to help you be very successful once you get to that destination, whatever it is for you? And we've been talking about college a lot, but we know there are other destinations too. Gap year could potentially be that for you, and a gap year could offer you a lot of that. And there are other opportunities that might offer that too. But we want you to know that unlike most of the chapters in your life right now, one chapter is coming to a close, but the start to that next chapter is not on a defined timeline. Oftentimes we end a professional position and we know that we need to get a job right away because we need to keep food on the table and we need to keep money coming in. But in this moment, there is no hard, fast timeline that you need to pursue college the moment you graduate high school. And in fact, taking a little bit of time, whether it's 3 months or 6 months or up to a year, might actually really be one of the best choices you made, so that you can get very clear on what's happening in that next chapter.
Yeah. I just want to say another piece about what I need to be successful, because I think, again, it looks different, and really caution you about this is kind of you checking in with you. What you need is different from what a sibling needs or needed, or a good friend needs or needed, or someone else in your class. So when we ask that, we want you to have that conversation. It might feel really quite private initially. And so start with your family, but It could be, I talk to a therapist every other week, and that's something I want to maintain. So I need that to be successful in either college or gap year. I need a lot of structure. I'm a little bit of a procrastinator. I'm still dealing with some executive functioning stuff. It's hard for me to organize myself. So whether it's a gap year or college, I know to be successful, I need structure. So those are the kinds of needs that, again, this question keeps coming back to both the college environment or other or gap year. And understanding and assessing. That's what this whole page is really about, isn't it? It's an honest self-assessment about what it is you are going towards, what it is you feel like you need right here, right now, to help you feel successful in this next stage of life. And, Jason was suggesting it in this earlier when we first started, but, absolutely what we see in terms of gap year is this is not a break in your overall academic or career progress. It's absolutely a bridge. And it's not an accident that bridge year is a term that has, diligently people have been trying to use to kind of reframe the gap year, because gap somehow connotes that it's a gap. There's something missing. It couldn't be further from the truth. So this is absolutely an augmentation, as Jason has said, about helping you get even more effectively, even more intimately, even more deeply connected to that place you most desire for yourself.
A challenge we want to offer you is to take a photo of this slide right now and sit down as a family and actually answer these questions. Actually take the time, take the 30 minutes to sit down over a cup of tea or over dinner and answer these questions and see what information comes out, because it's easy to come to a presentation like this and say, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Got it, right? And yet it's a totally different thing to actually talk it through, write it down, and say it out loud. And you might be surprised what comes out of that conversation. And parents and guardians, be great listeners, and students, be brave communicators. But we highly encourage you and offer you the challenge and the opportunity to actually start answering these questions and see what happens. You might be surprised.
Yeah. We know with the crash course that these are really intense and fast presentations, and we intentionally want to leave a lot of time for Q&A. So I believe that's our last slide. I think it's just our contact info is next. We offer free consultations. So just to mention, if you ever want to speak further to either of us, there are emails, our phone, our website. Follow us on Instagram, track us down LinkedIn, whatever works for you. But we offer free consultations for every family who's kind of going down this path and thinking about it. And, we start off with just a 30-minute call, very low pressure. I think it's a great way for you to take some of these specific questions and nuances to that next level if you're stuck as a family. But here we are with the Q&A, and I know that Claire is going to facilitate and manage it. And we'll also start dropping some links into the chat when we take a breath.
Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much. That was so fun. And I am super tempted now to go out and do those 5 questions. Thank you. I think that was some really good advice for our attendees here today. So, okay, I'm just going to pull up our Q&A box. So if anybody does have any burning questions that they want to get started with, please do drop that into the Q&A box. If it's easier, you can also drop it into the chat box. I'll be monitoring both. But in the meantime, so I am curious, Jane and Jason, what would you say, the benefits of working with a gap year counselor? What does that offer, a gap year hopeful that just diving into a program might not?
Yeah, that's a fun question. So gap year counselors are educational consultants. Our role is to help students decide whether or not gap year is the right path for them. So that's hence the title of this presentation. And then ultimately, if everyone agrees that this is the right path, we help students establish their goals for that time, and then ultimately link them with appropriate organizations, programs, volunteer experiences, internships, work exchange, and many other things like Jane was describing before. I think the advantage of there's a few advantages of working with a gap year consultant, but I think one of the biggest ones is that it actually takes a lot of the pressure and the guesswork out of it. This is a significant investment that you're making. And so in the same way that we wouldn't take buying a car lightly, the same way we wouldn't take choosing what college we're going to go to lightly, we shouldn't be planning our gap year lightly. It is a significant investment. If you are a soccer player, for example, or you're a musician, and you wanted to buy a brand new pair of cleats that were high end, or you wanted to buy a musical instrument, you would probably actually really want to compare and contrast different experiences with those instruments or in those shoes. You probably want to go to an expert who's going to help you get the right fit for you. And yes, you can buy anything you want off of Amazon, and you can find anything you want on Google related to gap year, but knowing whether it's the right fit and whether it's going to serve you in that actual set of goals you have, that's where it's helpful to get expert advice. So I think that's one of the main advantages of working with a counselor is it's not just about finding the information, it's about understanding the information that you're finding. And that's what a good gap year consultant is going to do, is they're going to support you in finding that, understanding it, and then ultimately along your journey, be one of those guides who is helping you through all the major transitions. Because believe it or not, most gap year students end up pursuing 3 or 4 or even 5 different experiences over the course of 9 or 12 months. So there's a lot of transitions that happen, a lot of growth that happens.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. That was an amazing answer. I really appreciate that. And I see also Colleen posted a question that has to do with my question, which is how do I actually find a gap year counselor? I think we covered that a lot. I'll also go ahead and promote USA Gap Year Fairs too. We have listings of, all accredited gap year counselors. So I'll go ahead and drop that link here below. But in the meantime, I'd like to answer Bird's question, which is what's the best way to research and discern programs, especially around that issue of structure?
Yeah. There's that is so much to say about it. I mean, I think, again, starting with your family and what the goals and interests are. So making sure, because, if you even just put in gap year into Google, I can't even imagine how many hundreds of millions of hits you would get. So similarly, like we want to get those filters set in as soon as possible. So you start hopefully starting right out the gate with a group of programs that already are pretty aligned with your budget and your goals, etc. So make sure you've gone through some of those steps of, what is your why, and a brainstorm and what you're looking to get out of it, etc. So then, the process of vetting, I mean, that's a huge piece of what we do, is vet programs. So it's a pretty extensive process. If it's specifically about the structure, then I'd be asking about the student to leader ratio. It's probably all up on their website. You might be interested in asking about just the background of the instructors, how long they've led or what else they do. Lots of them have other full-time jobs and they're seasonal contract employees. So I think understanding the kind of instructor and leader kind of role will also say a lot about the structure of a program. I would ask about a typical day. That's a really good way. What's a typical day and what's certainly a typical week? But a typical day will give you a sense of like, well, we all usually are having breakfast by 8 and then students have free time from 9 to 12, and you may be like, ooh, that sounds like a lot of free time. So maybe not. Or I always say to families, don't let the first answer be a barrier, just go deeper. Wow, that sounds like a lot of free time, 9 to 12. What do students generally do with that? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Actually, it's free time, but let me clarify. So, rare is the gap year program that will just set students afoot and free for hours on end without any kind of touchstone. So again, student to teacher ratio, background of instructors, a typical day. And then, I guess I would come back to you with the question of like, what kind of structure are you looking for? That means a lot of different things. Sometimes a family will say, my child takes an anti-anxiety or antidepressant and they forget a lot. So it seems like we do it. So to me, that's even another level of that structure is some of these programs actually will not administer or hold on to prescription medications, and others actually will. So I realize it's a very specific example. It's just the first one that came to mind, but sort of working again from your story and what what structure means to you and what your child to kind of where they need that level of support, and basically never being afraid to ask really direct questions. This is the gap year field, and it's really different from the academic arenas that you've been juggling and advocating for your child and kind of marching through the kind of, pathways that are available to you. These are people who really want to hear the unique nuances of every young adult and to see how they can accommodate it. We see a lot, so it would take a lot to really give pause to a program and consider your candidacy. So I think transparency right out the gate is one of the most important keys to success in finding the right match between student and structured program.
Thank you so much, Jane.
Yeah.
And so I definitely want to get to Nicole dropped a question in the chat, and Nicole, I will get to that question for sure because it's a great one. Really quick though, James wanted to know, just to clarify what you said, does one typically enroll in more than one gap year program, or do most last the entirety of a standard school year?
Smart observation. Such a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. In the early days of gap year, let's just say 15 years ago, when structured programs were really gaining ground coming from the United States, there were more year-long programs, quote unquote. So most of those lasted 9 months. There are still a few organizations that offer a year-long or 9-month-long experience. Usually, and it's important to note this, those experiences are broken up into segments. So it's not as if it's going to be the same kind of activity for the entirety of that program. You'll probably be engaged in several different specific activities over the course of time. Students will be gaining much more independence and responsibility throughout that semester as it goes on. Now it's very common to see programs offering anywhere from a semester length, which is anywhere between 12 and 14 weeks in most cases.
Hello, everyone.
Oh,
I am so excited to welcome you to.
Oh, it's Claire in stereo.
That was Claire. I was gonna drop. I'm sorry. I was gonna drop the video from the presentation I just did, Claire, because I talk about the progression. I was trying to multitask. Maybe you could find that and drop it. And Jason,
Absolutely, I can do that. No problem. I'll
No
do that right now.
So most programs do offer this semester length between 12 and 14 weeks. Some offer anywhere between 6 and 10 weeks. So you can imagine starting in September and going on a 10-week program, you're going to be done sometime in November. And then what? Are you engaged in a short-term volunteer experience? Are you diving into a shorter-term internship experience? And then what happens come January? Are you doing a second semester program? Or are you going to do something more independent like work? Are you going to go travel? Are you going to do a work exchange somewhere for 4 months? So actually, it is very common that students will put together 3 or 4 or 5 different experiences, both to save on the budget, because outside of these structured gap year experiences, programs that offer volunteering or those internships, as I was mentioning, or work exchange are going to be much less costly because they have much less infrastructure built in and much less overall mentorship for a student, which is what students tend to want later on in their year. And so the costs can actually go down. So if you have the budget for back-to-back semester programs, wonderful. If that's the right structure for you, wonderful. But again, it is quite common that people will have many more than just 2 experiences they pursue during their gap time.
Yeah. So what Claire just dropped in the chat box, and I'm so sorry for that little distraction. It was such a good question, James. And I think Jason did a great job covering it, but I just wanted Claire to drop in a link to 101 I just gave on Saturday. And it's a long one with including the Q&A, but if you fast forward towards the end of my slide deck, I spend about 3 slides talking about what we call a progression of a gap year and how you may take a few interests and kind of stack them into the year. Sometimes we assume with the crash course, you've already been to a 101. So we tried to make the presentation fresh to not repeat slides, but I think that video, if you haven't done a 101, would be really helpful because we guide you through the first very initial steps. Assuming maybe the gap year is right for you, maybe then go back and watch it. So sorry for
Absolutely.
that.
Oh gosh, don't apologize. Thank you so much for bringing that up and for dropping that or inviting me to drop that link. That's a really good point. And definitely also, if you haven't checked out a live Gap Year 101 webinar too, they're awesome events. So I recommend y'all do that too. Okay, let's get to Nicole's question because it's really good again. So how do you recommend approaching parents who never considered a gap year or are a bit rigid on going from high school directly to university?
Yeah. Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? You know, I think I might have glanced over that one at one point, and that's when I dropped a link to the data and benefits. So, I mean, we've heard students that have made like a PowerPoint presentation, and I think I have 2 main thoughts, and I'd love to hear what Jason has to offer and as well. I mean, the first is really coming back to the what is your why. I think that oftentimes the conversation can get rather defensive and or aggressive and that's just not a great. So, but if you've given some thoughts like what is your why, and you can identify I'm feeling, COVID's really kind of gotten me down. I feel like I'm not as motivated academically. I'm not feeling as connected to my friends. It just doesn't feel like a great place to kick off college. So once you've identified those, you literally can just translate that into a little bit of an elevator pitch and just shape those words a little more and be like, mom, dad, mom, dad, and dad, whoever it is, I would love to sit down with you because this idea of a gap year is really quite compelling. And the last few years have been incredibly hard with COVID, and then you can offer your why. So you invite a conversation and show that you've given it some thought and make a few points that honestly, any parent would have a really hard time refuting or refusing to hear. If our daughter were to come to us and tell us she is not happy and that she needs something else for her own personal enrichment or her academic growth, I can tell you we are going to stop everything we're doing to listen to her. But if we tell her to go do her homework and she has a fit, then we're just all fighting and we're not compassionate or curious. We'd love to be, but we're not all the time. So if you can really consciously and thoughtfully formulate some sentences to describe why you think a gap year could be so beneficial, I think that's a great starting point. And then the second, and I'll make sure I did put that link in, but try and scroll back into the chat, is pointing you towards the Gap Year Association, which is a standard setting body for accredited gap year programs and consultants in our country. We are longtime friends with the founding director who has recently retired, so to speak, and we have a new executive director who we're all quite thrilled about. But Ethan was adamant about bringing a high level of standard and data to the gap year movement in our country. People have been gapping over in Europe for 50 plus years, but it is a newer phenomena here in the last, let's say 20. Anecdotally, Jason and I can tell you about thousands of students we've worked with and the profound impacts the gap years have had on them. But now there's some data coming out too to support it. And I think parents like data. So I dropped a link so you could read some of that data. And I just want to share a few quick points because these are going to be ones you're going to want to go to. Gappers, there's a big myth that gappers are going to lose academic progress. Gappers are going to, not go on to college. A lot of stuff related to higher education. So this is where I think this will be such a good one for you. In fact, what the data shows, and again, completely supports what we've seen in our students for over 25 years, is gappers are going straight back to college after a gap year. Gappers are actually achieving higher GPAs in college than their non-gap peers. And gappers are graduating college in closer to 4 years. And did you know that the national average right now in our country of students graduating college is 6 years? So when we can bring that data to families as well, I think that kind of stuff has a real impact on parents. So I would read that research and data, find that link and share that along with your why with your parents and be like, could we just have more of a conversation? In fact, I found out that there are 8 professionally accredited consultants in the country. They all offer free consultations. Could we get on the phone with one maybe? So get your parents on a call with some consultants, and that might also be helpful. I hope that helps answer the question. I actually said you were going to say something maybe, but
the only thing I would add, and Nicole, I don't know if you're a parent or child, that was an interesting question, right? And you could be either or both. One of the things that comes up for me is just, it's scary being a parent, right? Like we're scared for our kids. And I hate to say that that's like one of the overriding emotions, but it is one of the ones that I feel. And I think it's one that a lot of parents feel. I just want to make sure that my child, our child, lives a contented, happy, non-destitute, not living in our basement as a 40-year-old life, right? They're worried. And so if you are someone who's about to graduate high school or has, your parents want you to go on and achieve all the things that you're capable of achieving. So if you can look at it through their lens of like, what are they worried about? What is this response, this rigidity? What's behind the rigidity? You might actually then be able to help ease their concerns. Oh, you're concerned that I'm not going to go to college? I have my acceptance. I have garnered my deferral from that school. I have worked with a gap year counselor or my high school guidance counselor to come up with a plan. I'm willing to work and pay for part of my gap year, whatever the concerns are that your family has. If you can help head those off in advance and share that with them, they're going to feel at ease. They're going to feel respected. They're going to feel like you're really thinking in their mindset. And their mindset is just, I just want to make sure that Nicole is going to be okay and that she's going to go on to do all the amazing things that we think she's going to do. So that's the only other
It's
thing.
great because fear is lack of knowledge.
Right.
When we're faced with our fear, and certainly as parents, it's because we don't know. And that's why I think you showing that you've thought it through, you bringing some data and even asking them, I think that would be really compelling. What is it you're afraid of? I would love to know why you feel concerned about this. And maybe together we could find some answers to it. Invite them into your process, appeal to their sensibilities. Yeah.
I love that. Invite them into their, yes, that is so good. Thank you guys so much for that. It looks like, okay, we just got another question popped in from Nicole. So Nicole said, I would like to do a work exchange, work away, world packers. My parents' biggest concern is their daughter living with strangers, mostly safety and generally, yes, a gap year being a new idea to them for sure.
Yeah, I think so. You've already done some good stuff. So you've done some preliminary conversations. I mean, I think that's a legitimate concern of theirs. I think those kinds of work exchanges are amazing. And there is a lot of vetting that you would need to do. So again, try to get your parents to just even a call, I would say, with a gap year consultant and have them bring that question up. And then in that call, you probably could get some tips on how to go about vetting those kinds of sites so that they might have a little bit more calm. And the other piece is if there's an openness and ability, if you can, again, look at kicking off your gap year with something a bit more structured, generally speaking, parents start to feel a lot better about those work exchange options later in the year when they know you've already gotten kind of your traveler's feet and gotten a little bit more street savvy out there in the world. Families tend to be a lot more open to some of those kinds of independent work exchange opportunities.
And if there's any chance you have a friend who might be able to go with you, that would probably help assuage their concerns
Strength
as
in
well.
numbers, always a good thing.
Yep.
Awesome points. Thank you both. Well, I want to encourage everybody also to just keep those questions coming. We have a couple more minutes left, and this is really your chance to pick Jane and Jason's brain for all of your burning gap year inquiries. I do have one again. Oh, okay. Actually, yes. Let's not do my questions. Let's get to David. How do you bring this up to my child when they don't seem ready for college and we think this may be a fantastic option? So
there's the other side of the coin. Those are the two questions, aren't they?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting scenario. And I also feel like this is where the transparent conversations together are really helpful, which is, son, we love you so much. We see so many amazing, great things for you in your future. We're really excited to support you in going to college, whatever that means. And we also really want you to think about a possibility where you could actually gain some more hands-on experience, some more independence. We really think this will help you be more successful. Would you be willing to come to a free gap year presentation by the USA Gap Year Fairs? Would you be willing to actually hear the testimonials or read some testimonies or speak with someone who's taken a gap year and just hear what that experience was all about? Would you be willing to take a look at this really interesting gap year program? I know you're so fascinated by engineering, and we found this incredible experience that looks like something that you might be really interested in. I think a lot of times young adults can't see beyond the path that has basically been presented to them their entire lives, which is going straight on from high school to college. And they are afraid they're going to be left behind. They are afraid that they're going to come home for the holidays in the fall and that their friends are going to be talking about all these amazing things and they're going to feel left out. They're afraid that they're not going to graduate with their friends, as if you ever graduate with your friends from college, right? Like when does that happen? Rarely. So, but their whole life up to this point has been set out on a course that unless something really wild happened, they graduated with all the people that they knew, and they've probably been going to school with them for most of their life. So the idea of deviating, that is what they're often afraid of. But you can also present this idea that this is kind of once in a lifetime. It's not easy to do later. This is the opportunity to actually do it now. Whereas once they graduate school, they're likely going to want to get right into their careers or having to start paying off college, that this is a special thing. I don't know what else you'd add. Sorry,
well,
I just
normally
went
that
tangential.
normally that question comes when a parent thinks their child would benefit from a year of maturity and growth, and no teenager really wants to hear that. So I think the other way to then open the conversation is, you could certainly say, we believe that this would be incredibly beneficial for a lot of reasons. And you could say for maturity and growth, but that might shut them down. I think the other way to then really draw students in is like, I'm not sure you're aware of how much is out there and what's available in a gap year. And I would start to hone in on the things that your child is interested in. So if they're passionate about video games or engineering or a language or the arts, whatever it is, like, did you know that you could work with wildlife on your gap year? Like, again, most young adults, just like adults, are coming in with some preconceived ideas, and they're not always that flattering, or they're not always that like inspiring to each individual. So pull on their happy strings. That's what I would say, is like, what they enjoy doing. Did you know you could actually work on your mountain biking skills on your gap year? And if that's something you're genuinely open to supporting, then I would offer those invitations to your child to say, look, that pretty much as far as we can tell, everything exists out there. We just need to find the right one for you. And we think that'd be a really fun thing worth exploring. So yeah, trying to appeal to their interests and trying to find experiences that line up with their interests, I think is a successful way to get the hesitant student to the conversation. Because again, if it's about maturity, which it often is, they don't want to hear that. So we need to look at some other ways to get them to the conversation.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And thank you, Nicole and David, for those two really kind of fun sides of similar questions. Heather and Jennifer, I will get to your questions. I see those. I can shoot you those resources right now. But I did want to leave time for James' question, which is on the timing of a gap year. By what time should you have your decision made to embark on a gap year? How far in advance do you need to be enrolled in a program?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's got a variety of answers, actually.
Yeah.
Shall I take a first
half?
Take a
first half.
So I'm going to actually just take the stance of the student who knows they want to take a gap year. So if you're a senior and you want to take a gap year, then right now is when you should begin the investigation process. And you're doing it if you're here, right? You should also attend one of the USA Gap Year fairs and start meeting programs. And you should begin calling programs, have that meeting with a consultant, like Jane was saying earlier. This is the time, this is your moment. And the reason why is because gap year programs over the last few years have started filling much more rapidly than in years past, partly due to COVID and more students taking gap time than normally would have, and partially due to the world having restricted areas that we can travel to and ultimately less sections available. So if you want to take a gap year and you're ready to kind of say to that college of your dreams, or if you're not even going to college, you're going to ultimately take this time, you would want to start planning now. If you are a student who applied to school and you're waiting for the results and you get them in April or by April, ideally, you're going to begin your gap year planning as soon as you have decided that you're actually going to take a gap year. So that's kind of the operating mechanism here. The moment you've decided is kind of the moment you want to start planning.
In terms of actual deadlines, as Jason suggested, many of our students are going to do a few different and distinct experiences over the course of their year. So I would recommend that, and we want you to apply to one at a time. So you don't have to be applying to every program at the same time. Start with the first one that's coming up and then the next one. And so you can kind of generally back off their start date of the program by about 4 months. And that's when generally at the latest you should have applied. So if it's a September start date, help me out going backwards for 4 months. Anybody? Anyone? Bueller? Anybody?
May-ish.
Right. There it is. There's that April, May.
Yeah.
But you want to have kind of done your research. So by April, May, you're enrolling and applying for your fall program. And then maybe in like June, we like to give our students a breather. We are going to push our students to enroll in their winter program because we don't want them in their fall program having the time of their lives, feeling like they need to be focusing on what's next. So we actually encourage our students to have their fall and winter plans totally applied for before they leave in the fall. Many students come home around the winter for winter break. Then they embark on their next program. But before they leave for their winter program, we get back on the phone with them and say, okay, let's put the finishing touches on the spring. So we leapfrog to the spring because you've made friends and connections and discoveries in the fall that could be really worth incorporating into the year. and particularly in the spring, you've made friends. So there's that person who wants to woof or work away. You've done an organized program, you've made great friends, you're going to go your separate ways, maybe stay home, work and save money in the winter. And then come the spring, kind of go on your last big adventure or experience. So that is also another part of that extended timeline, is back it up 4 months prior. If you leave in the fall with the first 6 months all set, that gives you plenty of time to just be in the experience, immerse yourself in it. And then around winter, maybe put the finishing touches on the rest of your year.
And if you are someone who gets, late acceptances, you get taken off of a wait list and it's late May, early June, don't panic. There will still be spaces. And remember that most gap year programs offer the same sections both in the fall and the winter. So perhaps that one experience you really wanted to do in the fall is full, but you can flip-flop it to the winter and then you can choose something else for the fall. So you can get very creative. We've seen students enroll in gap year programs in August that are leaving in September, right? It can happen.
Yep.
But if you want to have it be low stress, we encourage you to start in that timeline Jane is suggesting.
Wow. Well, thank you guys so much, Jane and Jason. And thank you all of our amazing, I think we have 36 participants left, which is awesome. Thank you guys so much for your questions. Jane and Jason, I know that you do have an event to attend directly after this, so I want to respect your time. But just a quick message to all of our participants out there. So I did drop that survey link again into the chat box. I would so hugely appreciate it if you could share your feedback with me, so I can better, help to improve these crash courses moving forward. And then also just a friendly reminder too, that we have so many more crash courses coming up if you enjoyed this one. So you'll be able to connect with other gap year counselors. And I believe Jane and Jason, you are presenting at more to come as well. So
we're going to talk about money next week, Claire.
So many more.
That is the big one. Well, and Jane, thank you. Thank you for dropping that in there. Perfect.
Sure. No crazy audio that time. Just shoot. It's like it's my first time ever Zooming.
I love it. Okay. Oh, just got a question from Jennifer. I'll take care of that, Jennifer, right now. But I want to thank you guys again for joining us, Jane and Jason, and thank you everybody tonight for joining us. And I think that will just about be the end of our crash course tonight.
That sounds great.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks everybody for coming tonight.
Good luck in your research. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.
Awesome. Take care, you all.
Bye.
Bye.